Today, I'm going to tell you the confession of a woman whose quiet decision left her husband with nothing. But this time, the truth runs deeper than revenge. It's a story about a forced marriage, a man everyone underestimated, and a secret that changed everything. I never imagined my life would turn out this way. If you had met me 3 years ago, you would have seen a woman with plans, ambition, and a very clear idea of the kind of man she wanted to marry. Someone successful, polished, respected. Not someone like Daniel. The day my parents told me I was getting married, I thought it was a joke. They sat across from me in our perfectly decorated living room, their expressions stiff, almost rehearsed. My father didn't even look me in the eye when he said it. "It's already been arranged," he told me. "The wedding will be next month." I laughed at first. I actually laughed, waiting for someone to admit this was ridiculous, but no one did. "Who is he?" I asked. My mother hesitated for a second too long. "His name is Daniel Carter. He's a good man." A good man. That was all they could say. I did my own research that night. What I found only made things worse. Daniel was a single father with a 6-year-old daughter. He lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town. No high-powered career, no social status, nothing that even remotely aligned with the life I had built for myself. On paper, he was the exact opposite of everything I had ever wanted. I stormed back into the living room, furious. "You expect me to marry this man? Why? What did he do for you? Is this some kind of deal?" My father's silence told me everything. "Our company is in trouble," he finally admitted. "This marriage, it helped secure certain arrangements. So I'm a bargaining chip?" My voice cracked despite my effort to stay composed. "It's not like that," my mother said quickly, but even she didn't sound convinced. It was exactly like that. I fought them for days. I refused, argued, cried, threatened to leave, but every path led back to the same cold reality. If I didn't agree, my family would lose everything. Years of work, our reputation, the life we knew, it would all collapse. And somehow, that became my responsibility. The first time I met Daniel, I was prepared to hate him. I had built an image in my head, a desperate man clinging to an opportunity he didn't deserve. But when he walked into the cafe, holding his daughter's hand, something didn't quite match. He looked calm, too calm. "Hi," he said simply, pulling out a chair across from me. His voice was steady, his expression unreadable. His daughter peeked at me shyly from behind him. "Daddy, is this her?" she whispered, not quietly enough. "Yes," he replied gently. "This is her." I didn't smile. I didn't soften. I went straight to the point. "Let's not pretend this is normal," I said. "We both know why this is happening." He studied me for a moment as if measuring something beyond my words. "Do we?" His answer caught me off guard. There was no desperation in his tone, no eagerness. If anything, he sounded indifferent. "I'm not doing this because I want to," I continued, my voice sharp. "And I don't plan on playing the role of a loving wife. That makes two of us," he said calmly. That was the moment I realized something was off. Most men in his position would have tried to impress me, to convince me. But Daniel didn't. He didn't try to win me over or defend himself. It was as if this marriage meant as little to him as it did to me, and that unsettled me more than anything else. "Then why agree to it?" I demanded. He glanced at his daughter, who was now quietly coloring at the table, completely unaware of the tension between us. Then he looked back at me. "Because sometimes," he said slowly, "what looks like a bad deal isn't what it seems." At the time, I thought it was just a vague, meaningless answer. I had no idea it was the first hint of a truth that would turn my entire world upside down. I should have walked away right then, but I didn't. A month later, I stood in a white dress saying vows I didn't mean to a man I didn't understand. The ceremony was small, almost suspiciously so. No grand celebration, no extended family from his side, no display of wealth or status, just a quiet agreement sealed in front of a handful of witnesses. If anything, it felt less like a wedding and more like a transaction. After the ceremony, I moved into Daniel's house. Calling it our home felt dishonest. It was modest, clean, and strangely warm in a way I didn't expect. Toys were neatly arranged in the living room, drawings taped to the fridge, and everything had a sense of quiet order. "This is your room," Daniel said, opening a door down the hallway. "Your room. Not ours." I stepped inside. It was simple but thoughtfully prepared. Fresh sheets, a vase of flowers, even a small desk by the window. He had made an effort, but not in a way that tried to impress me. It was respectful. "I'll stay in the other room," he added. "You won't be disturbed." I crossed my arms. "Good. Let's keep things clear. This is just an arrangement." He nodded once. "Agreed." That should have made things easier, but instead it made everything feel even more unnatural. Living with Daniel was nothing like I expected. He woke up early, made breakfast for his daughter, and walked her to school himself. He handled everything quietly, efficiently, without ever asking me for help or trying to involve me. At first, I was relieved. I didn't want to play house. I kept my distance, focusing on my own work, my own space. We barely spoke beyond necessary exchanges. But then there was Lily. She was nothing like the situation we were in. Bright, curious, and painfully sincere. She would sit at the table, swinging her legs, asking me questions as if I had always been part of her life. "Do you like pancakes?" she asked one morning. "I guess," I replied, distracted by my phone. "Daddy makes the best ones," she said proudly. "But he burns them sometimes." "I don't burn them," Daniel said from the stove, his tone calm as ever. "You did last time," she insisted. I almost smiled, but I caught myself. I didn't want to get attached. That wasn't part of the plan. Days turned into weeks, and something about Daniel continued to bother me. It wasn't just his calmness. It was the way he lived. He didn't act like a man struggling to get by, even though everything about his life suggested he should be. There was no stress, no desperation, no late-night worries about bills. He didn't flaunt anything, but he also never seemed concerned about money. One evening, I decided to test it. "Why don't you hire help?" I asked casually while he was cleaning up after dinner. "A nanny, maybe. Or at least someone to handle the house." He paused for a brief moment, then continued wiping the counter. "We're doing fine." "That's not what I asked," I pressed. "You're a single dad. You work, take care of Lily, manage everything alone. It doesn't make sense." He looked at me then, his gaze steady. "Not everything needs to make sense to everyone." That answer irritated me more than it should have. Who did he think he was, speaking in riddles like that? Later that night, I couldn't sleep. His words kept replaying in my mind. Not everything needs to make sense. It felt like he was hiding something, and I hated not knowing what it was. So I did something I probably shouldn't have. The next morning, after Daniel left to drop Lily at school, I went into his room. It was just as neat as the rest of the house. Minimal furniture, no clutter, nothing personal at first glance. But as I looked closer, I noticed something odd. There were no bills lying around. No documents, no signs of financial struggle. In fact, there was barely anything at all, until I opened the drawer by his bedside. Inside, there was a single watch. Sleek, understated, but unmistakably expensive. I wasn't an expert, but even I could tell it wasn't something an average man could afford. My heart skipped. Where did he get this? I reached for it, turning it over in my hand. It felt heavy, precise, like something crafted with intention. This didn't belong in a house like this. It didn't belong to the man I thought Daniel was. And then I heard the front door open. My chest tightened. I quickly placed the watch back and closed the drawer, stepping away just as his footsteps approached. "Is everything okay?" His voice came from the doorway. I turned around, forcing a calm expression. "I was just looking for something." He didn't respond immediately. His eyes moved briefly to the drawer, then back to me. For a moment, the air between us felt different. Tense, like I had just crossed an invisible line. But then, just as quickly, his expression returned to normal. "If you need anything," he said quietly, "you can just ask." I nodded, but inside my thoughts were racing, because for the first time I was certain of one thing. Daniel Carter was not who he pretended to be. From that moment on, I couldn't look at Daniel the same way. Every small detail I had ignored before suddenly felt suspicious. The way he carried himself, the calm confidence in his voice, even the way people seemed to subtly respect him when we were out, it didn't match the image of a struggling single father. I started paying closer attention. A few days later, I followed him. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I needed to understand the man I was legally tied to. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I needed answers. He dropped Lily off at school as usual, kissing her forehead before she ran inside. Then, instead of heading toward any workplace I knew of, he drove in the opposite direction, toward the city center. I kept my distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with every turn. He finally stopped in front of a building that made my breath catch. It was a towering glass structure, the kind of place where executives in tailored suits walked in and out with purpose. Definitely not somewhere a man like Daniel should be. I watched as he stepped out of his car, and then something happened that I wasn't prepared for. A uniformed security guard at the entrance immediately straightened up and greeted him with visible respect. Not just a casual nod, something more deliberate, almost deferential. Daniel didn't even slow down. He walked inside like he belonged there. My heart started pounding. I hesitated for a moment, then got out of my car and followed. As I approached the entrance, the same guard stopped me. "Do you have an appointment?" he asked politely. "I'm looking for Daniel Carter," I said, trying to sound confident. The guard's expression changed slightly, as if reassessing me. "Mr. Carter is in a meeting." Mr. Carter. The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. "Can I wait?" I asked. He studied me for a moment, then stepped aside. "Please, go ahead." Inside, the lobby was even more impressive. Marble floors, high ceilings, a massive company logo displayed behind the reception desk. Everything about this place screamed power and money. I walked up to the receptionist, my pulse racing. "Excuse me, Daniel Carter?" She smiled professionally. "Do you have an appointment with Mr. Carter?" I swallowed. "I'm his wife." The word felt strange coming out of my mouth. Her smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "One moment," she said, picking up the phone. I stood there, feeling completely out of place, as if I had just stepped into a world I was never meant to see. After a brief conversation, she hung up and looked at me again. "He'll see you now." Of course he would. An assistant escorted me to the elevator, pressing a button that required a key card. We went straight to the top floor. With every second that passed, my chest felt tighter. The doors opened to a quiet, luxurious hallway. Soft lighting, thick carpets, glass walls overlooking the city. This wasn't just an office. This was the kind of space reserved for the person in charge. The assistant stopped in front of a large door and knocked once before opening it. And there he was. Daniel stood by the window, his back to me, hands casually in his pockets. The city stretched out beneath him like it belonged to him. He turned slowly when he heard the door. For a moment, neither of us spoke. But something had changed. He looked the same, yet completely different. The man in front of me wasn't the quiet, low-profile father I had been living with. There was authority in his posture, a quiet power that filled the room without effort. "Leave us," he said calmly. The assistant nodded and closed the door behind her. Silence fell. I took a step forward, my voice barely steady. "What is this place?" He studied me, as if deciding how much to reveal. Then, instead of answering directly, he asked, "You followed me?" I didn't deny it. "You lied to me." "I never lied," he said. "You just assumed." That stung more than I expected. "Then explain," I demanded, "because none of this makes any sense. That house, your life, the way you act, and now this." I gestured around the office. "Who are you really?" He held my gaze for a long moment, and then, finally, he answered. "My name is Daniel Carter," he said calmly, "and I own this company." The words hit me like a shockwave. I shook my head instinctively. "That's not possible." "It is," he replied simply. I felt my world tilt. "All this time," I whispered. "You're telling me you're rich, that you've been hiding it?" "Not hiding," he corrected, choosing not to show it. "Why?" My voice rose despite myself. Why would anyone live like that? His expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened slightly. "Because money shows you who people really are," he said, "and I've had enough of people wanting something from me." His words echoed in the room, and suddenly everything started to make a terrifying kind of sense. The simple house, the quiet life, the lack of concern about money, the way he never tried to impress me. He didn't need to, because he already had everything. "And me?" I asked slowly. "What am I then? Part of some test?" For the first time, there was a flicker of something in his expression. Not anger, not amusement, something more complicated. "That," he said quietly, "is what I'm still trying to figure out." I stood there, completely speechless. Because the man I thought I had been forced to marry was not a burden, he was a secret. And I had just uncovered the beginning of it. I left that building in a daze, my mind struggling to keep up with the reality I had just uncovered. The man I had dismissed, resented, and barely tolerated was standing at the top of a world I didn't even know he belonged to. The drive back felt longer than usual. Every moment we had shared replayed in my head, but now everything looked different. His silence wasn't emptiness. His calm wasn't indifference. It was control, choice. And I had completely misread him. When I got home, the house felt unfamiliar, as if I were seeing it for the first time. The simplicity I once judged now felt intentional. Every detail suddenly seemed deliberate, like a carefully constructed illusion. That night, Daniel returned as if nothing had changed. He hung his coat, checked on Lily, and asked her about her day. His voice was gentle, his movements the same as always. If I hadn't followed him, I would have never known. I stood in the doorway, watching him. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" I finally asked. He didn't turn around immediately. He finished helping Lily with her homework before answering. "As long as necessary." "That's not an answer." He looked up at me then, his expression calm but firm. "It is." I stepped closer, frustration rising again. "You let me believe you were struggling. You let my family think they had the upper hand. Do you have any idea what they're planning?" "I do," he said. That stopped me cold. "You do?" He nodded once. "Your father's company isn't just in trouble, it's collapsing. The marriage was his way of buying time." My chest tightened. "So you knew from the beginning?" "Yes." "And you still agreed?" My voice shook. "Why?" This time he didn't answer right away. He glanced toward Lily, who was now quietly drawing again, completely unaware of the tension surrounding her life. "Because I had my own reasons," he said quietly. I wanted to push further, life to demand every truth he was holding back. But something in his tone told me I wouldn't get more. Not yet. Days passed and the distance between us shifted in a way I didn't expect. I couldn't go back to ignoring him. Not after what I knew. I started noticing things I had overlooked before. The way he always made sure Lily felt safe, the patience in his voice, even when he was clearly exhausted, the quiet discipline in everything he did. And slowly, something uncomfortable began to grow inside me. Respect. One evening, Lily fell asleep on the couch, her small hand still clutching a crayon. Daniel carefully picked her up, carrying her to bed with a gentleness that made my chest ache. "You're good with her," I said softly when he came back. He paused, as if surprised by the comment. "She's my daughter." "That's not what I meant," I replied. "You're present. Not everyone is." He studied me for a moment, then looked away. "I try." The simplicity of that answer stayed with me. For the first time, I realized that despite everything, his wealth, his secrets, this was the part of his life that mattered most to him. And it wasn't something he pretended. But just as I started to understand him, everything began to unravel. It started with a call from my father. "Come home," he said, his voice tense. "Now." When I arrived, the atmosphere in the house was suffocating. My mother looked pale, my father pacing like a man on the edge. "What happened?" I asked, my heart racing. "It's worse than we thought," he said. "The deal fell through. Investors are pulling out. We're finished unless..." He stopped, looking at me with something that made my stomach drop. "Unless what?" I pressed. "Unless Daniel helps us," he said. I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You think he's going to save you?" "He has to," my mother insisted. "You're his wife." I shook my head slowly. "You don't understand him." "Then make him understand," my father snapped. "That's why we arranged this in the first place." The words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, I saw it clearly. To them, I was still nothing more than a tool. I left without saying another word. That night, I found Daniel in the kitchen, quietly making tea like it was any other evening. "They want your help," I said bluntly. "I know." "Then why haven't you done anything?" I demanded. He set the cup down slowly, his movements controlled. "Because helping them isn't simple." "It is if you have the power to do it," I shot back. He looked at me then, his gaze sharper than I had ever seen it. "Power doesn't mean obligation." The room fell silent. "They're my family," I said, my voice softer now. "And what have they been to you?" he asked. I didn't answer, because for the first time I wasn't sure. He stepped closer, his voice calm but unyielding. "If I step in, it won't be charity. It will come with consequences." "What kind of consequences?" I whispered. His eyes held mine, steady and unreadable. "The kind that will change everything," he said. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The truth I had uncovered about Daniel wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a decision that could destroy one life to save another. I didn't sleep that night. Daniel's words kept echoing in my head. Power doesn't mean obligation. And worse, what have they been to you? I had spent my entire life believing that family meant loyalty, sacrifice, unconditional support. But now, when I replayed everything, being forced into a marriage, being treated like leverage, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. By morning, I had made a decision. When I walked into the kitchen, Daniel was already there, as always. Calm, composed, untouched by the storm that was tearing through my mind. I want to understand the consequences, I said. He didn't look surprised. It was as if he had been expecting this moment. They'll lose control of their company, he said plainly. If I step in, I don't invest. I acquire. The word landed heavily. Acquire, I repeated. You mean you'll take everything? Yes. And them? They'll walk away with enough to live, he said, but not the empire they built. I swallowed. So you're not saving them. You're replacing them. I'm preventing a collapse, he corrected. What they do after that is up to them. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I understood the weight behind his choices. He wasn't cruel. He was precise. And what about me? I asked quietly. There was a brief pause. That depends on you, he said. That answer unsettled me more than anything else. Later that day, I returned to my parents' house. They were waiting, their eyes filled with desperate hope. Well, my father asked immediately, did you talk to him? I did. And my mother leaned forward. I took a slow breath. He's willing to step in, I said. Relief flooded their faces instantly, but I wasn't finished. But not the way you think. Their expressions froze. He's not investing, I continued. He's acquiring the company. Silence. Then my father laughed, sharp and disbelieving. That's ridiculous. Why would we agree to that? Because you don't have a choice, I said calmly. The room turned cold. You're taking his side? My mother whispered. I'm telling you the truth, I replied. This is the only way anything survives. My father's face darkened. We built that company from nothing. I'm not handing it over to some what? I cut in. A man you thought was beneath you? He fell silent. Do you even know who he is? I asked. Neither of them answered. That's the problem, I said. You never bothered to find out. The tension in the room became unbearable. You owe us this, my mother said, her voice trembling. Everything we've done for you. No, I said quietly. You decided for me. You used me. Her eyes widened, as if she had never expected me to say it out loud. I'm not your bargaining chip anymore. For the first time in my life, I walked away from them, without guilt. That evening, I returned home. Daniel was in the living room, reading while Lily played nearby. The scene was so ordinary, so peaceful, it almost felt unreal compared to everything else. They won't accept it easily, I said. I didn't expect them to, he replied, closing his book. But they will, I added, because they have no choice. He studied me carefully. And you? I hesitated. This was the moment that mattered. I'm not asking you to do it for them, I said. I'm asking you to do it because it's the right move for you, for the company, for the people who will lose their jobs if it collapses. His gaze didn't waver. And not for your family? I shook my head slowly. Not for them. Something shifted in his expression then. Subtle, but real. For the first time, I wasn't standing between two sides. I had chosen one. Days later, everything moved quickly. Meetings were arranged, lawyers involved, documents drafted. My parents fought it at first, delaying, arguing, trying to negotiate control they no longer had. But in the end, reality won. The company was transferred. Just like that, everything they had built was no longer theirs. I watched from a distance as it all unfolded. No satisfaction, no triumph, just a strange sense of clarity. That night, after everything was finalized, the house was quiet. Lily was asleep. The world outside felt distant. Daniel stood by the window, just like the day I had confronted him in his office. It's done, I said. Yes. They'll never forgive me. He turned slightly. Do you need them to? I thought about it, about everything I had been taught to believe, about everything I had lost and everything I had gained. No, I said softly. The word felt lighter than I expected. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question I hadn't been ready to face. Why did you really choose this? I met his gaze. Because for the first time, I said, I wanted to choose something for myself. Silence settled between us again. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. And somewhere in that quiet, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. This marriage, the one I had been forced into, was no longer just an arrangement, but what it would become next was a choice we hadn't made yet. The days after the acquisition felt strangely quiet, as if the storm had passed but the air hadn't quite settled yet. News spread quickly in the business world. Daniel's name, once hidden behind layers of anonymity, was now being spoken with a mixture of awe and caution. The man no one noticed had just taken control of a collapsing empire without raising his voice. At home, though, almost nothing changed. He still woke up early, still made breakfast, still walked Lily to school, and somehow that contrast made everything feel more real. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen watching him flip pancakes, perfectly this time, I realized something had shifted inside me in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. "You're not even trying to hide it now," I said. He glanced at me briefly. "There's no reason to." "And yet," I added, leaning slightly against the counter, "you're still here, in this house. Is that a problem?" I shook my head. "No. It's just unexpected." He placed a plate in front of Lily, who immediately lit up with excitement. "See? No burnt ones today," she declared proudly. I smiled without thinking. That was when it hit me. Somewhere along the way, this place had stopped feeling temporary. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, I found Daniel on the back porch. The city lights were faint in the distance, the air quiet and cool. "You could live anywhere," I said, stepping beside him. "Something bigger, more fitting." "For who?" he asked. "For someone like you." He let out a soft breath, almost like a quiet laugh. "This is fitting." I studied him. "You really don't care about appearances, do you?" "I used to," he admitted. "A long time ago?" "What changed?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted outward, but I could tell he wasn't really looking at the view. "Lily's mother," he said finally. I stilled. It was the first time he had ever mentioned her. "She cared about status, about what people saw," he continued, "and when things got difficult, that was all that mattered to her." "She left?" I asked carefully. He nodded once. "When Lily was a baby." Something tightened in my chest. "And after that," he added, "I stopped building a life for other people's approval." The honesty in his voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "I'm not her," I said before I could stop myself. He turned to look at me then, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said, but it didn't feel like a reassurance. It felt like a possibility he hadn't fully trusted yet. Days turned into weeks, and something between us continued to shift, slowly, carefully, like two people learning a language neither of them had spoken before. We started talking more, not just about practical things, but about everything else. Small conversations at first, then longer ones. One night, Lily insisted we both sit with her to watch a movie. She curled up between us, completely content, as if this had always been her normal. At some point, she fell asleep, her head resting lightly against my arm. I didn't move, neither did Daniel, and in that quiet moment, something fragile but undeniable settled into place. Later, as I gently adjusted the blanket over her, I whispered, "She trusts easily." "She deserves to," he said. I hesitated, then asked, "And you?" His eyes met mine. "I don't," he said simply. The answer didn't hurt the way I expected. It made sense. "I don't expect you to," I replied. "Not yet." There was a brief silence. "But I'm not going anywhere," I added. The words surprised even me. For the first time, I wasn't speaking out of obligation or circumstance. I meant it. Something in his expression shifted again, subtle but real. Not certainty, but the beginning of it. And that was enough, because I finally understood something that had been there from the very start. This story was never just about a forced marriage. It wasn't even about wealth or power or the secrets we uncovered along the way. It was about two people who had every reason not to trust each other, learning, slowly and painfully, how to choose each other anyway. I took a quiet breath, then looked at him one last time before turning toward the hallway. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night," he replied. And for the first time since this all began, it felt like the beginning of something real. If you've made it this far, I'm curious, what would you have done in my place? Would you have made the same choice or chosen differently? Let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel.